Oh, Jimmy Hancock, this is long overdue, man. Welcome to the Millhouse.
Thanks, Andy.
We're all good pals, Nikki and I and you, Jimmy, obviously through the elk hunting. But you and I go way back from the skiing days and on Aspen Mountain. You've been an instructor there forever. But I think your most important role on that mountain, is working on the World Cup, preparing the course for all the great athletes that came into town. And your passion for elk hunting, we'll get into that. But more importantly, I really want to hear about how you guys pioneered floating the Black Canyon of the Gunnison. But let's just go back to World Cup days. How long have you been in here in the Aspen area, and when did you start becoming a ski instructor up there?
Well, Andy, I moved to Aspen in 1972, and I thought I knew how to ski, but I really didn't.
Were you a ski bum?
Oh, yeah.
Where are you from, Jimmy?
I mostly grew up in California. We lived in Texas for a couple years when I was really young, but mostly in Northern California. So we skied a little bit. But I was in school at Berkeley in 1972, and near the end of the war, and there was riots and things every day, and they canceled school, and we're like, what are we doing here? And I got into my buddies. I told you about it because of your new car. I got in his 911S and we drove out to Aspen. It wasn't spring break. They just closed school down. And I just went, wow, this place is like nothing I've ever seen. And I loved it. And I went back home that summer and I worked in a cannery all summer and dropped out of school and came out that September in 72. So then I worked in some shops and I got into ski school about the same time we started in the River Company, which is about 1976. And
the River Company is being the Black Canyon stuff?
Well, no, we had a raft company here in Aspen that started as just a raft company.
Oh, here
on the Roaring Fork and the Arkansas and the Colorado. And I grew up fishing and hunting, and I wanted to get into the fishing aspect of it from the very beginning. And so we got a fishing outfitter's license, and we were just looking for new places all the time. And that's really how we stumbled on the Gunnison.
Mm-hmm. Your good buddy that's a partner with you with the raft, stuff over in the Black Canyon, he says the reason that you guys gravitated to each other is because of your work ethics. You like to work long hours, fish really hard, and it's a part of the interest you guys have in all outdoorsmen is like what's around the corner-ism, like what's out there. And he said that you were born 200 years too late.
I feel like I'm 200 right now. So I don't know about that.
He says you're one of the great outdoorsmen, and you always gravitate to the hard stuff,
Well, I think maybe there's some truth to that. I think the hard stuff is often the fun stuff. And the way we got going on the Gunnison is, as I said, we had this company here, and the whole river running thing was kind of in its infancy then. There was the Grand Canyon, of course, started earlier, and up in Idaho, the Middle Fork of the Salmon were really well known. But in the 70s is when just river running really took off. And anyway, we were always searching for rivers. And
when you say river running, that was just rafting down through
about just
rapids and stuff?
All of it. Recreational fishing fishing was going,
all
but
the above.
The whole thing. Mm-hmm. So anyway, we were looking for new rivers, and I had always heard that the Black Canyon and the Gunnison was the best river in Colorado by far.
Did you read that, or did you just hear that from stories?
I think hearsay mostly, yeah. Nikki. I can't honestly say exactly, but it was out there. I mean, I know, Andy, when you were growing up, you used to go down there sometimes, and I had walked down in the bottom of it once, and it was mind blowing. But the word was that you couldn't get boats through there, and we just kind of took it at face value. And then one day, my good friend Eric Gosney, who was working for us, he was watching a outdoor show on Sunday afternoon from Denver. And this would have been like 1978, I think. And in those days, an outdoor show was a guy with a slideshow sitting on his couch clicking black and white, But he was clearly on the Gunnison and in the canyon, and he was catching these big old rainbows. And And Eric called me and goes, "We got to go find where he was." And "You're right, we do." And we went immediately and packed up the truck with some boats, and we had no idea where we were going other than the general idea of its location. We came in, and we actually came in on the opposite side of where we approach it now. And it was in the spring. We're rolling in. We got stuck in the snow. The truck dropped to its axles. And I said, "Well, I guess we're camping here tonight." So we just got out and camped. And when it was frozen in the morning, we got up and drove away. And we decided, well, maybe we ought to go to the other side of this canyon. So we drove down to Delta and headed towards Montrose. And we're just looking. You can kind of see that the wall, the top of the canyon.
Had you ever seen the canyon before?
I had been in the upper part one time.
Well, let's talk about the canyon. Before we get a little bit further, let's talk about the Black Canyon of the Gunnison. What is this place? And what did you first see when you saw it? And I'll tell you what I saw, after you have to, tell me what you saw. But it's basically a 14-mile canyon. It's the highest canyon in Colorado. It's a 2,500-foot drop into a narrow canyon. And the narrowness is between like 40 feet at the narrowest and 1,000 feet at the most. So
is that accurate, Jimmy?
I'd say mostly. The canyon's actually a little longer than what you're remembering, Andy, because what is now the national park is the uppermost stretch, which is below the Crystal Dam, and it goes about 12 miles down to where we now put in, and then our trip's about another 15 miles. So total canyon's about 27 miles long.
So the internet is wrong.
Height, I think.
I was trying to go on the internet to get the actual numbers, but look, you know better.
There's a real misnomer going on with the Black Canyon, and where we run our trips is called the Gunnison Gorge, just from a purely bureaucratic definition. It's the same exact canyon. There's a piece of plastic up in the middle of the canyon, and if you take one step above it, it's the Black Canyon, and one step below it, it's the Gunnison Gorge.
Right.
And so it really is confusing to people, but it's all one canyon. Mm-hmm. And what we run is the gorge is the lower section of the Black Canyon. The upper section, right upstream of where we put in, is actually a national park. And then down where we are is a designated wilderness area, the Gunnison Gorge Recreation Area and Wilderness Area. And you've been up there with us, Andy. When we walk up from the put-in, we're actually in the park. But that's probably where this confusion came. But the actual canyon is about 26 to 27 miles long. And I think those numbers on the elevation are approximately right.
Yeah. It's one of the things that's most amazing about the canyon, the reason why, your story is so interesting is because you're one of the first guys to pioneer this whole thing. But I really wanted to talk about the magnitude of this canyon before we dove into it, because this canyon, the rock faces like the painted wall. It's just spectacular. And later in the day, the light, when that sun starts to go down.
The solitude, and you don't see very many people, and it's just wild out there.
Yeah, and it's like if we're not on the right alignment with the sun, it can be a very brief day.
Yeah,
But anyway, so your truck gets stuck. The next morning when the snow is frozen, proceed from there.
Okay. Well, we drive around to the west side of it, and we basically just looked up, and it seemed as though there was a lower spot you can kind of see the rim. You don't really identify it as such, but if you know what you're looking at. So we just started driving that way, and there was no signs. It wasn't marked in any way, but there's a dirt road, and we took the wrong way and got dead-ended several times. And finally I saw a guy on horseback, and I jumped out of the truck and I ran over and waved him down and go, "Hey man, is this how you get to the river?" And he's looking at me like, "Well, I think so. Just head on up that way and cut on there. I think that road will take you towards it." So we did, and we got to the same place that we now park, which is about 1.2 miles above the river, which is the closest you can get. We walked down, and we knew that was the spot. And as you both said, there's just, it's an amazing place. It's so beautiful. And any really steep canyon, it provides a sense of isolation that is greater than the actual distance it may be from things, because you're just completely closed off from the rest of the world. No one can
That's
get
a great
there.
way to put it.
Yeah.
And it really does. And that's one of the things that just grabs you immediately. So anyway, we were all excited, but our weekend was over and we went, okay, well, we're going home. We're coming back next week. And so we did. We drove back. We knew we were in the right spot. We came back the next week and we folded up one of the rafts and put it on our back on a pack frame, just like we carry elk quarters out, and the oars and the frames. And we carried everything down there. It took us 3 or 4 laps. And of course, we didn't see a soul then. I mean, it's still quite unspoiled, but there's people around. And anyway, we ran it.
But did anybody tell you about the rapids and how big they were and the lines? And I mean, how dangerous was this?
It was definitely high adventure because I had never spoken with anyone that had done it. There was no written material that I was aware of on running the river. I just knew this guy on Denver TV had done it, and we were like, hell, if he can do it, we can do it. We know how to row a boat.
Holy cow. But what about waterfalls and stuff?
Was he float fishing or was he wade fishing?
No, he floated. He was
did.
in a little boat, so we knew you could get through.
Could do it. Yeah, exactly.
But no, we didn't know, Andy. It was really fun. Because we had to stop every time we'd hear a rapid coming up, we'd pull over and try and watch it. And some of them, as you guys both know from being down there, you can't stop above it. You just go. And I think it was very lucky for us that when we went that first time, it was at a pretty benign level. Some of the levels down there are much easier to run than other levels. The lower it gets, the tougher it becomes. And of course, now you can look up online and see how many cubic feet per second are going down there, and we know what that means. But I don't think I'd even heard of cubic feet per second at that point. We're just going, let's go fishing. Let's go run this river. And we didn't fish a lot the first time, but a little bit. We were mostly just concerned with getting through there. And we went very Spartan compared to how we do it now. But we fished a little, and, it was obvious just looking at the water that this was beyond just a really cool place, going to be a great fishing thing for us. So anyway, we made it through, and that first year we were running trips around here. We'd started to do some day fishing trips, but mostly just whitewater things. And I think we went back 2 more times that summer just to check it out. And we're going to start offering these trips immediately. And then we started fishing a lot more, of course, on the second and third trips. And we made our own names for the rapids and the camps. And
what kind of names did you have?
Well, the one of the most serious rapids down there is the one called now Boulder Garden. When we were scouting Boulder Garden, there was a dead bald eagle right in the gully as we're walking across. So we called it the eagle spot. That's just so we could remember it, which that didn't stick, and it shouldn't have. It was a crummy name, but we just tried to identify it ourselves. And so we had all these little names for things and slowly figured it out. And I think we did our first commercial trip. In fact, I'm sure that we did the next year in 1979.
Wow. What kind of
And was that the first commercial trip on the Gunnison?
Well, I don't think so, Nikki. It's possible. The man who probably most people would consider the real first pioneer down there was named Gabe McTutu. And I talked to his son, Ben, just the other day, knowing we were going to do this. Yep. And he's not exactly sure when his dad did this first trip either. It was right in that same area. And it's conceivable that we did the first one or he did the first one, but he did more trips those first couple of years than we did. He jumped into it a little more, and he's the one that took the BLM people down there and showed them what they had. They didn't even know it was down there.
Right.
And so a lot of the names that he had became the names that we still use to this day, and I think the BLM changed some of them. But I'm sure that we were the first 2 to start. And like I said, who actually ran the first one, I don't know. But we never ran into them down there for several years. And we were only doing a few trips because it was just so brutally hard to carry everything. And then when we were taking customers, we were carrying coolers that weighed 100 pounds on our backs and then running back up in 100-degree weather and taking the boats.
You must have been in great shape.
I must have. And we had these homemade wooden frames that weighed just ridiculous amount.
What were the growing pains like of refining this art form to a commercialized fishing, venture down into this great canyon?
Well, it was a long process, and the greatest innovation by far was we discovered that someone had domesticated horses. And we were going, what are these creatures? And the way that worked, we actually ran into this gentleman I was referring to, Gabe McTutu. I had heard about him, but we'd never run into him on a trip because there was so little use. Well, anyway, we're down there with this stuff, and I got 100 pounds on my back, and I look up, and here comes a horse going by me with the boat on it. I'm like, wait a minute, what are those creatures? So we ran right over and goes, tell me what's going on. Who's this? Can we hire you? And it turned out it was Ron Franks, whose family, his son Larry, still owns the operation to this day. And that was the thing that really turned the corner to making running commercial trips down there viable. We just couldn't, we'd get down there and we were so beat up, we could barely really function when we were down there.
Yeah.
And we still just loved it. And the fishing was amazing and the place was amazing. But all of a sudden we had a way to get the gear down there. And so I suspect that was about 80 or 81. I'm not 100% sure of this sort of stuff. But so that was the beginning of the change. And then over time, part of it was that we just refined what we were bringing, but also, as is true in the whole outdoor industry, there's been enormous leaps in the weight of gear, even the clothing and the weight and the oars and the frames. And we found a place that made these custom frames out of aluminum and that you put them together and they fold up and we can put them on the mules. And that was huge. And, the coolers, we're using the Yetis now, which are heavier, but because they control the ice so well, we found that they're just fantastic for us. And even though they weigh more, we don't have to bring as much ice.
And you can beat them to crap.
Yeah. Put them on mules, which we do.
I'm kind of intrigued with the rapid stuff. I mean, I would think that that would be the scariest part for me, to keep everybody in the boat, keep everything contained. And it's not like people haven't flipped boats down there.
No, it's relatively serious. I mean, people run many more crazy things in the Gunnison, but it's not a walk a float through the park in any means. And it can be scary at times, but we were pretty well versed in running whitewater because we were doing it all the time.
Before you got down there.
Yeah, but it's still, doing it unknown was a level of adventure that you just can't find. You can't go to a river anywhere now where somebody doesn't have a guidebook written about it. And this rap is this level, and at this water level, you're probably going to take a line to the left. I mean, doing that and figuring it out on our own was really great adventure and great fun. But it is scary. But having said that, the most dangerous thing down there by far is wading around on those rocks. Luckily, we've never had anyone really seriously hurt, but we've had some broken ribs and a broken ankle.
So you're talking about wading around a rapid to get to another spot to wade fish?
I'm talking about, just existing down there in the canyon. Yeah. Whether you're wading to fish or you're walking to fish or walking around camp, it's just, it's nothing but giant, sharp rocks everywhere.
Yeah.
And we've had far more minor injuries on the rocks than we have in the water. But of course, the potential is always there, and boats do sometimes flip and people get pinned, and it's a real, it's a real factor. And the isolation of it makes all of it more serious. People run a lot of really heavy rapids in places that they often have, you can call 911 and a heartbeat, someone can help you. It's right down the road. And, you don't have that option down there, which makes all of it more serious. Anything that happens down there is a more serious situation. And of course, in those days, now we have the Garmin's in-reach devices and things, and we can get word out if need be. But for many, many years, it was totally isolated in that regard. And even with cells, there's no cell service down there ever. So unless you have a satellite thing, so that's real. But it was.
How many times have you flipped?
Me personally,
Yes.
I have never.
Never down there.
I have actually never flipped a boat anywhere, Nikki. I've been quite lucky in that regard. But we've had one or two go upside down, and we've certainly had boats pinned on rocks, and we've had to rescue other people quite a few times.
How do you unpin a boat that's pinned?
With a lot of physical effort, but we have a pulley system with ropes and carabiners and stuff like that. And sometimes you can just pull them with 5 or 6 guys, just pull them. Sometimes you pull them upside down when you're getting them back upright.
Is the boat pinned out in the middle of the river? I mean, how do you get to the boat?
Well, it depends. The last time I had to do this, it took me about 20 tries to throw a rope out to them. We just couldn't quite make it. I was standing up to my chest trying to throw a rope, and it's falling just short of the guy. We finally got him a rope, and once you get a rope, they were up on the rock, the boat's pinned, they had climbed on the rock. Once we get ropes on it, then you usually, if you have these pulley systems and stuff and enough people, you can usually get it to shift.
Were you a fishing guide before you got into the whole rafting fishing? A wade guide?
No, I never guided, Andy. I fished all my life. I grew up hunting and fishing, and I loved it. And as soon as we started doing some day trips around here in the really early days, about the same time this started, but I had never worked fully as that. I got involved with a couple of friends and got into this company, and that was our focus at first, was just doing river trips.
I want to talk a little bit about the fishing in the Gunnison. We talked about the logistics and how you found it and pioneered it, but the fishing, let's talk about what it was like in the early 80s compared to what it was like now, today.
Great question. And it's very interesting because the fish were certainly less educated then, even though for a trout stream in this day and age, they're still quite uneducated compared to what we have around here. But I've thought about this a lot, and what's interesting is we weren't nearly as adept at it as we are now. We were figuring out how to catch them down there, even though we still caught a lot of fish, and they were certainly easier in that regard, but we hadn't got the hatches nailed down, and we just, I think a lot of times we actually catch more fish now than we did at the beginning because we're so much better at it. And a lot of our clients are so much better at it too. We have people that have been down there. We have one gentleman that I think has done this trip 40 times with us.
Wow.
And people just love it so much that they come back and they get better and we get better. The biggest difference that we're all aware of was the whirling disease that struck the Gunnison really hard in the 90s. For some reason that I'm not 100% aware of, the rainbows down there have always been the class of the river. A lot of rivers, it's the other way around, and the browns get bigger, but the rainbows outgrow the browns in that environment. They always have. And the biggest fish we caught were always rainbows. And we used to catch, I would say, a higher percentage in those days, although that's returning pretty well now. But in the 90s, as you guys both know, the rainbows in much of Colorado and the Rocky Mountain, the whole West, in many places were almost decimated by whirling disease. And whirling disease does not affect the browns at all. So for a while, the fishery really changed to being almost all browns. It's hard for me to remember the exact years, but I would say around the turn of the century was probably the height of it. And there were trips in there where, wow, we caught 3 rainbows this week, and that was a big deal. And we were really worried about it, but they have restocked them and they're doing incredibly well. And it continues to improve. I mean, there's still more browns than there are rainbows in that river, but I would say right now it's probably 75% browns and 25% rainbows. But the rainbows are, for the most part, when you catch them, that's what you're after. They are the class of that river for sure.
Yeah, for
sure.
And
they get huge and they just get so fat and they're really something.
How big is a big one?
Well, you know, if you talk
23.
inches, I'm sorry,
23.
anything over 20 inches is a really large trout, pretty much anywhere you go.
Yeah,
I mean, we always laugh about, is that a guide 20 inches or is that a real 20
Real
inch?
20, yeah.
Most people call an 18-inch trout a 20-inch. A
A
genuine
15-inch trout, a 20-inch.
Yeah, right. You know what I'm talking about, Nikki. A legitimate, and a 20-inch rainbow in that river will weigh oftentimes close to 5 pounds.
Wow.
A 20-inch brown in there probably weighs about 3.
Right.
They just don't have the girth. So it's really more about the weight. But yeah, we catch, you know, it's not unusual to catch 22, 23 inches, or I should say to hook them.
Yeah.
It's harder than heck to land them because it's
You
just
got big rapids below you.
There's rapids everywhere, and there's huge rocks, and it's you know, and it's hard to follow the fish. If you're able to hook one of those biggest ones when you're in the boat and you're moving, you have a better chance because you can stay with the fish.
I remember I used to target the salmonfly hatch when I was hiking down
sure.
into the canyon. Tell me about that. I mean, what an amazing bug.
The salmonfly hatch is certainly the most famous fishing thing on the Gunnison. It happens in June. Like any deal like that, trying to pinpoint it each year is a hard thing. It varies with the water level and temperatures and all that.
It's like the worm hatch in the Keys.
It is.
Yeah.
You guys know, you could say that's normally like at the end of May, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it could be into June or middle of May under certain conditions.
Exactly. We know like this window, but we don't know the exact.
It's usually like the, you know, following the full moon in May on that low falling tide starting around 5:36 in the afternoon, early evening.
But sometimes they throw you a curveball and they hatch on the incoming.
On the incoming.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
it's just like what you're talking about.
Look, what you said that's exactly what it's like. There's a window, and people always want to know when it's going to be. And I go, look, it's going to be in June,
Just
sometimes even in early July.
Just fish every day.
Yeah,
You'll eventually
right.
get it.
So you don't know, but it is a remarkable spectacle. I mean, there's times when there's just thousands and thousands of these 3-inch long bugs flying around.
Nikki,
and,
I remember when I was down there
they
camping
crush 'em.
at the base of the painted wall on that little sandbar. I'd hike down the SOB trail, camp on that sandbar, and early in the morning you'd wake up and you'd stick your head out of the tent and you look up and it looks like you have 1,000 little helicopters this big flying around the sky, and that early light off the walls, it's like something you'd never seen before.
Yeah, I've never seen that. I'm guessing there's a time where the fish just get so gorged that it can be pretty tough.
Yeah, it's really interesting. They eat, we call it cheeseburgers, you know, it's like there's times when they've eaten 20 of those things and they're stuffed.
Yeah.
But I think it's a lot like people. I think overeating leads to more overeating. They don't say stuff that long. But it is true. You will have, even in the heart of the hatch, you will have a few hours where just nothing's happening. They're just down there like, oh man, I need a cigarette.
It's kind of like you in the Keys when you're full and you open up that bag of Cape Cod chips.
I don't. Oh man, I just keep chowing.
Yeah, right. It's the same deal.
Yeah.
But so it's hit and miss, Nikki. It's very different than most trout hatches. Like if there's a big caddis hatch or a certain mayfly, or when the green drakes are happening around here, the fish are watching like all the time, and they'll come up and get them, and they'll come up and grab one of these things that are this long, and they're like, oh man, I'm going to go down and have a cigarette, recover. And so they don't come up just one after the other. It's real random. In fact, I constantly will tell people when they see a real splashy rise, which they usually are, because they're often in fast water, and people will try and cast right to it immediately, and you can't blame them, but I try to get them to hold off. I go, give it 30 seconds, give it a minute if we can. I'll try and row the boat. I'll try and hover here, because they don't just sip one and go right back to their spot. It's real interesting.
They're down there chewing it. It's such a big bug. They're not just swallowing it.
Right.
They got to chew a couple times to get it down.
It takes them a while for sure. And
did you find that the fishing might be a little bit better before the hatch? You know, where the fish are anticipating these bugs?
I think that our experience is that pre-hatch, the nymph fishing with those big stones is incredibly good. Because as you know, unlike caddis and most mayflies, the stoneflies do not hatch in the middle of the river and then fly off the river. They crawl out of the river, and their husks are all over your waders and your boat and the oars and the coolers and everything in the morning. Sometimes there's hundreds of them that have emerged overnight. So the fish pick them off as they're crawling out, and the nymphing can be really, really good. But in my opinion, the dry fly fishing is much better at the end of the hatch and even after it's over sometimes, if it's just still going slightly, because their life cycle is such, they live for 3 years and they hatch.
The salmon flies do.
Yeah.
Huh.
And so they're in the river in the larval stage, in the nymph stage for years. And that's why it's always the go-to fly at any time of year. But once they first emerge, they crawl out, and it takes them a while to get going, and they're looking to mate. And you see pictures that we take and others of just literally a wild orgy on a tree where there's like 1,000 of them piled up on top of one another. It is. It's insect porn, but it's very tasteful. And anyway, but then once the females, they come back to the water to lay the eggs, and they also start getting weaker because they don't live very long. They live like a week or so. I don't know the exact time. And I think they get weaker and more of them fall in. So the fish become more tuned to eating them on the surface from, say, the middle of the hatch on. Mm-hmm. And it does last up to 3 weeks on and off. Some days will be bigger than others, just like what you're talking about with the worms. I'm sure that there's days when it's going crazy, and then the next day not as much, and maybe a day after that. I don't know how long that lasts. This lasts, we generally figure we have 3 weeks of what we consider hatch fishing. And sometimes it's the first week of June to the 25th. Last year when we had flood stage, it was all much later, and it was more like the 20th of June to the 10th of July, and that's the latest I've ever seen it.
Do you charge double during that period of time?
No, we don't. We're not smart
like
enough.
The keys?
I didn't say I was a good businessman. I think I'm pretty good at catching them. We charge the same, and obviously those dates are pretty highly sought after, right. But it's quite the spectacle to see, and to be able to catch consistently that big a fish on top is really a fun.
Just to give people like a reference, when did it happen this June?
Well, I would say this year was a pretty typical of what you'd say an average one, in that the first trip that we did that we had really great dry fly hatch fishing put in on the 12th of June. And it was probably going for some days before that. That's just when we were there, I remember. And then we had another one. We got off, and like 2 or 3 days after we got off, I believe it was the 20th, was, I would say, the absolute heart of it. And then we had another trip the last week of June, and the fishing was really excellent, but there weren't as many bugs around. And that's pretty typical. Mm-hmm. What we have found is the higher the water, the later it seems to be, slightly later. If a really low year, sometimes it starts that first week of June pretty heavily. And all of these things, just like the rut and deer and elk, it's going to happen because, and the light, the amount of available light in a day is what triggers it to a certain extent. But it seems to me that the higher water, especially if it's murkier, it keeps the light out of the river for longer, and I think that's why it gets delayed. Because last year was like a record year, and we had people that came in early July, and we do the trip all summer, and it's great fishing, and it's a great trip, but we don't bill it as a salmon fly trip. Gotcha. And we had incredible salmon fly, dry fly, all the way almost to the middle of July, and that was very unusual. But just for your reference, we often call it the Father's Day hatch, because if you had to bet from one year to next, somewhere around that mid to few days past, 15th to 20th would probably be, if you were able to chart it, the peak is generally in somewhere in there. But I've definitely seen it earlier and quite frequently later.
What I see, excuse me, Nikki, but you know what I see that might be so appealing to the Black Canyon is like most of these rivers around Aspen are so filled with people all the time. So there are only a couple of guide permits down there that have clients down there fishing. So the banks are not loaded with people. When you're down there, you're remote and the fishing is yours.
Look, I think that's maybe the greatest appeal out of the whole thing. It is, the road itself going in there is really nasty, as you guys both know. But you got to carry everything almost 1.25 miles to get there. And either carrying it on your back or you're hiring the horses, which prices some people out. And for this day and age, to be on public land, and we have very little competition. You're almost always by yourself where you're fishing on the river. I mean, you might see a few boats go by, but if you could drive your truck down there and back in, there'd be 150 boats a day, like there is on the Roaring Fork and the Eagle around here and in Montana on practically every river I've seen. And it's just, that is really the key to it. And it is because you got to earn it. You got to carry it on your own back. It's still hard to pull this off, and not nearly like it was before horses, but that's what's enabled it to stay such a special place. Mm-hmm. They only allow 2 companies. There are more than 2 companies that operate, Andy. There's not a lot, but they only allow 2 of us to launch each day. So that's the maximum you can have.
Well, and that might be 2 to 3 boats per party?
Well,
how many boats
the
do you guys run?
maximum party size that's allowed under everyone's permit is 12 people, including the guides. That would be generally 4 boats. That's the absolute maximum. So it's 2 or 3 or 4 boats. And a lot of times we'll do a trip with 6 fishermen, and then that's 3 boats, and we use a 4th boat as a gear boat or an extra guide.
Right.
Look, the amount of use that it gets is phenomenally low compared to almost anything else you can find. Yeah. Now you can wade, you can walk and wade, and the advent of these smaller personal watercraft, like the pack rafts and things, have increased the private use for sure. But even so, once we get spread out in there, during the hatch, is on a weekend in the hatch is probably the only time of the whole year where you might even think it was crowded at all. There are many trips. I've done a trip this season where we didn't see another boat for the whole 3 days. That is unusual, but it's not out of the question. So and that's what attracted me to it in the first place, as much as anything. It's like, this is, you gotta earn this to be here. And you feel it when you're down there, just the feeling of being in that canyon and being by yourself and looking up and having this stretch of river to fish that's as good as anything you're going to find. And, and having it to just you and your buddies is a really hard thing to find in this day and age.
But after the salmonfly hatch, it's not like the dry fly fishing is over and it quits. You can still catch them on dry flies. Because I feel like if people can't get in with you during the later months of June, it's not like they're going to be nymphing the whole time.
Yeah.
You are going to be dry fly fishing, correct?
Yeah, it depends on the time. But the late summer, the big dry fly is big terrestrials. There's an incredible amount of grasshoppers down there. We do a lot of hopper-dropper combo with a big dry fly, whether it be a hopper or an Amy's ant or a Chernobyl or
chubby,
any of that, just the basic ones. And then you drop a little standard Western nymph off of it. It can be quite deadly. Sometimes we get some good caddis stuff in the evenings. But there's a lot of nymphing, and the streamer fishing down there is also phenomenal at times, especially if you get a little cloud cover. But no, look, as great a spectacle as the hatch is and as amazing as it is, I think I could argue that I like August actually better than any other time.
Why is that?
Well, we get so used to having this place to ourselves that just even a few people, you're kind of like,
yeah,
what are you doing on my river? And during the hatch. And later in the summer, there's certainly less. And the hoppers have gotten mature by then, and they're big old giant bites, and it can often be really good fishing. The other thing about August that I think is really different there is sometimes they actually give us more water. This is controlled by dams. And when the irrigation is starting to get over for the farms and everything else is getting too warm and too low, and sometimes it actually gets higher and better down there in August. Also, it's not quite as hot just because it's very hot, but the angle of the sun changes. And as you alluded to earlier, Andy, sometimes the amount of time the sun's on you down there isn't very long. And in July, it's still great, but it's hotter. In August, you get more shade both morning and evening. You tend to get more of the monsoon going on, and I think that helps the dry fly fishing too. But yeah, I don't feel at all that it is something that has to be only looked for during the hatch.
Right.
We have people that have been coming for 30 years that have hardly ever come in the hatch just because it doesn't work for their timing.
Right.
And,
but you camp for 3 nights, if I'm not mistaken, on the typical drift.
Well, it's 2 nights and 3 days.
3 days, okay.
That's the maximum anyone's allowed within the wilderness area. We can add and sometimes do a 3rd night. Once you get below where the Smith Fork, that tributary comes in, it's a little more open.
Right.
But no one's allowed to stay more than 2 nights in the wilderness area.
Do you ever have a client from hell? Because you got to have them day and night. You have them on the raft. You have them on the campsite.
You can't get rid of them for 3 days.
Can't get rid of them.
That's true. You can't get rid of them, but not very many. Because luckily,
oh come on, Jimmy,
we don't. The thing that's different, Nikki, is if you're doing a day trip, you're going to get people that they saw the movie, as we used to call River Runs Through It or something, and they just want to try it. And they're not outdoor people at all. And you got them for 3 hours and that's what you got. And it can, but most people are not going to sign up for a 3-day camping trip where they got to carry their own bag 1.5 miles unless they have some semblance of some a little bit of outdoor experience.
Didn't you have a real big guy that stuck himself with the fly one time?
Oh yeah, we have had some adventures, and this story is pretty funny one. This guy, he's a really good guy, and he came with us a couple of times. But yeah, he was 300 plus easy. He had to have his own boat.
A bigger boat?
Well, no, but we didn't let him have another. He had to pay for his whole boat because we can't take 2 of them. And he didn't care. I mean, look, the guy is great. He had a great sense of humor. His name's Charlie. He came down one time, and the next year his buddies are going, yeah, Charlie's lost 50 pounds. And, make sure you say something. That's great. And which it is great. And he comes down and he waddles down the trail. And I go, wow, Charlie, you're looking good. You lost 50 pounds. And he goes, that's like throwing a deck chair off the Queen Mary. I go, that's a hell of a line. So he's not fooling himself. But anyway, he is a really nice guy, but he was difficult to have down there. Well, one day he's in my boat, and I don't know how this fly even got there, but he sat on a fly and got stuck in his, butt cheeks. And all of our flies, I know you guys have a lot of saltwater listeners. They're all really small compared to what you use, but this was a pretty small fly, like probably a 16, maybe even an 18. And it's bedded in. We try to pinch the barbs all the time because of the remoteness of it more than anything else. It's hard. And anyway, it went in, and he had real fatty flesh, obviously. So I'm in there, and he's in the boat, and he's bent over, and I got my head in between his legs, and I'm wrestling with this thing, and I can't get it out. And I tried, the trick you guys know where you can tape it and then try and pull it, and it was just so little and so wobbly that I couldn't get any purchase to do that. It just wouldn't work. It wouldn't work. So, and it's hurting him. I'm pulling on him, and it's hurting. I go, all right, well, look, Charlie, we're close to camp. Let's go down to camp. We'll take a break, have a beer. Maybe you get on shore, and we'll ply you with whiskey, and we'll get it, we'll work on it then. So we do that. We get him there, and now he's bent over the table or something, and I'm wedged in there, and it's just not working. It's not working. And I'm going, what can I do? What can I do? And well, we had a guide at that time, Dog, we called him. Dog was a pretty heavy partier. And I just started thinking to myself, how can I make this work? And I had a feeling that Doug had some numbing agent in his bag somewhere.
Some marching powder.
Some marching powder, as we used to call it. And in fact, I was sure that he did. So I told Charlie, I go, just hang out for a bit, catch your breath. We'll come up with something. So I go over to Doug. I go, Dougie, I need some powder. And he's like, what are you talking about? You don't do that. You don't even like that stuff. I'm not giving you any of that. You know how much that costs? And I go, Doug, I need a tiny amount. And so I talked him out of it. And we put a little in the beer bottle cap. And I put like 3 or 4 drops of water in it and ran a Q-tip around it. So I told Charlie, I go, yeah, we've got this stuff for numbing toothaches, like I think Ambisol is a product that they make. I said, let's try that. Maybe it'll help numb it. So I'm pulling on the fly, and I've got the Q-tip, and I'm putting it all around. I pull the fly, and I'm letting it sink in, and I'm giving a little tug, and he doesn't even flinch. I go, shit, this is working. So I just kept working it in and trying to pull the fly and let this water get down there. And finally I gave it a pretty good tug, and he didn't even flinch. So I just grabbed the forceps and I just ripped it right out of there, and he never even felt it. So that was,
I had a trip one time, a long time ago. I guided very briefly. And I had a couple of guys with me.
You guided?
Yeah, very briefly. And these guys were back. It seemed like that they were partying pretty hard. And I get on the river and we're dry fly fishing, and this fly gets wet, and I break out my, the powder, the dry fly powder, and I get the fly, and I'm bouncing in there. And the guy looks in there, he sees this white powder, and he goes, what is that? I said, it's cocaine. It makes your fly float better. He goes, no, don't do that again. He goes, hey, Bobby, get over here.
Yeah, I bet he did.
I think you're making that up.
No, it's a true story.
I think you're making that up.
That's a true story.
Well, I made up the other ones. Yeah. No, it was true.
I got a question for you. You said that you catch more fish now than you did in the late 70s, early 80s when you're first starting to go down there. Why is that? Is that because the flies in the line change? Is it because you know more about where the fish live? Why do you think you're more proficient in catching fish now than you were back then?
Good question, Nikki. Sorry. And I think it's mostly the latter. I think it's mostly that we know where they lay.
Right.
Just think about places that you guide on the Roaring Fork.
Right.
That it's like, and if I stand here, I'm going to get a great drift. If I move 3 feet, it still looks as good, but they never eat it when I stand on this rock. I got to stand on this rock. I'd say that is the biggest factor, is just, we know so many lies, and it's like, I can tell people, look, we got to get 3 more steps out here and you're going to get the right drift. And I found that mostly from experience. And also just what they eat, but they're not that picky down there.
Right.
It's mostly the presentation and where you get to fly. And also, I think a lot of people, including us, they get so whipped up on this salmonfly hatch and the dry fly that they don't realize that the nymphs are their primary food source. They live in the larval stage for 3 years. They live in an adult stage for a week or 10 days or whatever. And the fish are so keyed in on those. And we didn't used to use the big stonefly nymphs as much as we do now, not nearly as much. It took us a while to think, the hatch is over, and we'd throw everything else. And like I mentioned, I believe earlier, a lot of our fishermen are a lot better than what we used to get. Plus, we have refined, as we touched on a little bit, Andy, we've refined our whole operation, our food and everything else, and we have a little more time just to dedicate to helping people fish and standing on their shoulder more and telling them, no, try this. See that run up there, go fish that kind of thing. We can direct them a little more, I'd say a little more efficiently. That helps. And I don't want to underestimate how much it makes a difference. We have so many people that come every year, and they're really good fishermen. I mean, there's some locals here in town that these guys, they go to Florida and they go tarpon fishing, and they go to British Columbia and they go steelhead fishing, and they do at least one trip on the Gunny every year. And not only are they good fishermen, they have also they've been down there enough times. They know spots. I don't even have to point them out. They go, I'm
Right.
going up to that hole
Right.
where we caught that huge rainbow last year or whatever. I think all of those things together are the reasons, but I don't think there's any doubt that we're much more effective than we used to be.
Yeah, right. You still get excited 40 years later to walk that trail down?
Yes. I get more excited to get there
Yeah.
than I do to walk the trail. No, I do. In fact, we had a trip last week. I was supposed to return, I guess, yesterday. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But these guys had to cancel at the last minute. Good guys, legitimate deal. But so I haven't been, and already like I'm jonesing to get back down there. There's just something about it, that place, that is so remarkable. And, you know, I love showing it to people, and I love the fact that people come year after year, people that can afford to go do whatever they want in the world. And this is one of the things on their list, and that they appreciate it so much. And I love showing it to new people as well. But it's just, you know, when you have the same guys, gals, whatever, families come and you go, oh, the so-and-so's coming, the Joneses are coming, these guys are coming, this is going to be great. And, you know, it's just like going with your friends. And so, yeah, I do. I'm very fortunate that I'm still physically able to do it. I mean, there's no, I'm by far, except for Mike Haas, who's with us and is 1 year younger than me. We're the two oldest guys down there by a mile. And I remember about, I hate to say how long ago it was, but quite a few years ago, these guys are down there, and one of the other companies are going, I can't believe you guys can still do this. You must be in your 50s. And I'm going, yeah, well, we must be. I was already in my 60s at that point, I think. But
That's a compliment.
yeah, no, I know. It was just funny. But in any case, yes, I do. I mean, there's just something that's so special about the place. And I love to fish. Okay. I mean, I love it. And I love the fact that, you know, you don't know. We catch lots of small fish. It's trout fishing. We catch lots of little ones, just like you do everywhere. But you never know when you're going to catch one that's going to rip all your line out and snap you off so fast you didn't even react. And just knowing that that's out there adds a huge element to the fishing. But when I sit around in the winter and I think about, you know, it's cold and I'm sick of this, a lot of times what I think about is sitting at the camp, having a cocktail at night, talking to my buddies and telling lies about the day's fishing, just like any kind of fishing, you know,
right.
and it's such a great place to camp and be down there. The camps are beautiful, and the feeling of it, as I mentioned earlier, the feeling of isolation that you get and totally being away from things is so hard to find. And yet we're able to do it in a pretty high level of comfort now with light modern gear, and we have nice chairs and we've made tables and all this kind of stuff. And to be able to get all that and everybody down there and be in that situation, yeah, I definitely look forward to
It's more than a fishing trip.
Absolutely.
By far.
By far.
When you can no longer do this yourself, row down the river,
Right.
would you be paying other people to take you down? Or if you have friends to take you down and still be a part of it?
Andy, I will continue to do it on whatever level I can as long as I can. How that will manifest itself, I can't say.
Right.
But as you know, the company's recently been sold and to guys here in town, and I really like these guys, and I think they're going to continue to really do it in the right fashion and respect what's going on down there. And I'm going to go with them as long as I can, one way or the other.
Do you want to tell what the outfitter's name is?
Yeah, I mean, look, our company has been called River Rats, Gunnison River Rats, for many, many years. And it was bought by Elk Mountain Outfitters here in Aspen, or is it even Outfitters or Adventures? See, what do I know? Anyway, Elk Mountain. And then, but they're keeping the name River Rats for the Gunnison.
Cool.
So it's Elk Mountain / River Rats. And, yeah, I mean, we were already working together, and Connor's been on most of the trips, and they're starting to incorporate some of their guys, and we're going to try and keep all of our continual customers. And I'll take a walker down there if I have to.
Yeah.
Once I get to that point, I don't, you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
The answer is I can't imagine a time where I wouldn't want to be down there sitting on the side of that river and yucking it up with my buddies and catching some fish and having a great time. And whatever level that ends up being, we'll see.
You know what I love about you, Jimmy, is that you've always followed your heart at a great level. Like, you're not just a ski instructor on Aspen Mountain, you're the race director for the World Cup. So you're up there responsible for preparing the downhill for the World Cup when they come into town, the best skiers in the world. So you removed yourself a little bit sort of during a certain time of the year on that mountain to really prepare this course for the best skiers in the world. But besides the Black Canyon of the Gunnison, I see that your heart has really been affected by elk hunting for a long time.
Yeah, you wear a lot of hats, Jimmy.
Yeah, I mean, tell me how elk compare to being in the Black Canyon of the Gunnison and chasing those animals, because you're also an elk hunting guide, along with chasing these animals on your own.
Well, you guys are the same. We have a lot of the same passions, and I think it's really a great thing to be able to have really different things to do throughout the year. I think it keeps all of them more interesting. And the three of us, especially archery hunting for elk, it's a hard thing to compare anything to. It can be incredibly grueling. It can be incredibly boring sometimes when nothing happens, but it's also like the most exciting thing in the world when you're in the middle of them. And it is, it's amazing. I think one of the other things that's so special about elk hunting, especially archery in September during the rut, is that it's such a short-lived thing. It's just like we spoke about the Gunnison. The hatch is short-lived, but we're down there for 3.5 months a year, and it's great anytime you go, but that's a pretty big chunk of the year. And the same thing with skiing. It's more like 5 months here where we live, and that's a pretty big chunk. But that window when those bulls are screaming is, 3 weeks maybe.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's super precious because of that, I think, to all of us. You just can't, I don't think there's anything that I look forward to as much. And I don't know if I really like it better than going down the Gunnison or building the race course or skiing, but I know that the amount of times that it's really right at the essence of it is such a short period of time that, you can't. I'm already twitching the
Yeah, right when you walked into the house, you started talking about broadheads and Utah elk.
And tags here, tags there. It's
yeah.
very fun because we've known each other forever. And there was a big period in my life where I was not around Aspen when you became the race director, but I started going down to the canyon with you guys a couple of times.
I think it's chief of race.
Chief of
right?
race.
That's my title.
Yeah,
or
chief
used
of
to
race.
be. I retired. This was my last year from there.
Awesome.
But we didn't get really tight until we started talking about the whole elk thing.
That's true.
And that brings on a whole different level of fever, if you will.
Yes, I agree. I've told other people that same thing, Andy, that look, I moved to Aspen. I'm right off the bus. It's like, who's the coolest guys around here? Well, Andy Mill, he's skiing skiing. I'm not kidding. He's skiing. I've always, as I think you probably talked to Mike or somebody. I don't know. I've always been attracted to what I think is the epitome of whatever sport it is, doing it the most challenging, the hardest way, that kind of thing,
Yeah.
And I grew up, I wanted to be a professional baseball player, which is also a really difficult sport, but I wasn't good enough and I wasn't big enough and I didn't make it. But when I came to Aspen, it was clear to me there's all a bunch of ski bums around and it was an incredible place. But the guys that are the baddest ass in skiing are ski racers. It's unquestionable. Mm-hmm. This other stuff, you can argue it all you want, but that's the way it is. It's the way it was then, and it's still the way it is.
Yeah,
and I wanted to be involved with it, and that's kind of how I got started on the race stuff. But I kind of went off on a tangent there. But so I knew you from that, and I knew you a little bit from fishing and doing stuff. But then you got into the elk hunting, I think, a little later, in your life. And then when you found out, we were already friends, but you found I was doing it, every time I would see you on the ski hill, it'd be, did you get an elk this year? What do you think about this? What are you shooting at? And just, I would just ignore whatever I was doing, and we would just jump right into it.
It really brings out the kid in you guys.
Yeah,
for sure.
It does.
Yeah. I mean,
it's not that far away.
We go back to our youth because we can't do it, that much longer. So we're always going to be, connected to those great memories that we had, But we talked about the client from hell fishing wise.
Yeah.
Did you ever have a client from hell guiding elk?
I'm trying. Not one thing.
Jimmy,
jumps.
you're on your best behavior today.
I am.
If this was a Saturday night, any other night,
well, you get good stories. But look, I think the hardest thing about guiding elk hunting with not one specific person is that people are not fit enough, and that's what drives you crazy. Because as you guys know, it's a grueling thing, and what we consider relatively easy, like you'll be looking at a ridge and it's right there and you can hear them screaming on the other side of it and you're like, let's go. And you look back and the guy's tongue's hanging out and, you've walked like 100 yards and you just like, give me that goddamn gun or bow. Let me do, you know what I mean? That's the most frustrating thing.
Mm-hmm.
Most people
they're
are
half
good.
Your age.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
A lot of times. But really, honestly, most people that do these things, they have a lot in common with you. They may not be as good at it as you are, and they may not be as physically capable, but they want to be out there in the woods, or they want to be on the river, or they want to be on the flats. You know what I mean? They want to, so you've got some common ground. And that doesn't mean you don't get lots of funny stories and things happen, but I haven't dealt with a lot of people that I just don't like.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's a few. We've had people that are, a few times in elk hunting, they just show up and they're just really, they're not into it, or
they don't understand the magnitude of what they're trying to do and the full depth of it.
Yeah.
They see it on TV. They go, I want to go do that. Or they see.
Well, they get fixated on the result.
Yeah. They
That's
see a
true,
tarpon
too.
flying through the air and they want to go catch a tarpon, but they have no idea about the elements that are involved about casting, double hauling into the wind and,
The whole process.
long days out there.
Absolutely.
But one of the things that I most admire about you, Jimmy, is that you have really gravitated to a high level in a multifaceted dimension with skiing, with fishing, and with hunting. You do what people would love to do on a weekend or in a period of 5 days. Your whole life is consumed with chasing your heart. And most people are kind of stuck trying to pay bills. You pay bills too, but you do it vicariously through having a great time.
Well, sometimes I'm able to pay them. No, look, I appreciate that, Andy, and it is true. I'm really blessed. I'm really lucky. I've been able to find a way to squeak by doing all the things that I really love to do. And, as I mentioned, or we all did, the fact that life here is so seasonal, that I really like that it's like a totally different world. I even have different friends. I do have friends that cross all of those areas, like you two and many others. But there's other people I only see in the winter, like their skiing's their whole deal, and they're great. And then there's other people I only see fishing, or some only hunting, and I'm able to intersect with all of those different deals. But it's not unlike, there's a lot of us that have managed to do this. I mean, look at your whole career, doing and excelling at things you love to do, and we're so lucky to have been able to do that. And as far as guiding and taking people around the ski mountain, I get as big a kick out of watching somebody catch a fish as I do catching one now. And that doesn't mean I still don't like to do it.
I get that.
But it's such a cool thing, and to see or to turn a new person onto it, and to see them get it. And when you talk about the clients from hell type of deal, I mean, I'm not coming up with a lot of stories about terrible people because we don't have that many, but some people just have this instinct and some don't. And Mike and I always, the old hunter-gatherer thing, like you'll go out with someone or we'll go, how's this guy doing? And you go, he's a gatherer. It's just like, that's kind of like, that's all you got to say. But you could have a 10-year-old girl and she's a hunter.
She knows how to get
it doesn't
done.
matter. You can tell right away. You'll look over and her dad's slopping around, making noise and throwing rocks and standing in the sun. And she's like sneaking around behind bushes. And you go, there's the hunter, there's the gatherer. That's kind of like the one word that just puts him in a category. It certainly doesn't make him a bad person or even somebody I can't have a good time with. But some people just, maybe they're more evolved than we are. Maybe they're less. I don't know. Maybe they're filtered down and it's diluted too far. But some people just don't have that instinct to go get them.
But you know what's really important here is that those people, even though they may not be the hunters and they may not be a natural at it, you got to give them a lot of credit from coming in. They may be out of shape. They may weigh 300 pounds. But they want to get into the woods and experience that and touch that paradise, touch that rainbow. And you got to give them credit. And I love those guys, even though they may be clumsy and this or that, but they're in the game.
Look, I agree with that 100%, Andy. And they are, to a large degree, the people that fund our lives and also, in a larger sense, help fund conservation and good wildlife practices and everything that is important to us. Because if somebody doesn't love something, they don't want to protect it. Mm-hmm. And even if they're only just touching it on the fringe, like you mentioned, and they don't delve into it just deeply into their souls as we do, it's still there. They feel it, and they'll get back and they'll go, you know what? I'm so glad that they made the Gunnison a national park, or that,
and then they write a check.
Yes,
towards the conservation
that's what
organization.
I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
And so those people, I definitely appreciate them, and that's why I don't. You know what I mean? I try to appreciate everybody, and some people you get along with better than others in any phase of your life, whether you're guiding or just people you meet. But yeah, those and they want to be part of it. And the other thing that comes back to anybody that spent a lot of time guiding is sometimes you'll come back and you'll just like, Jesus, and you go, what? But if they weren't inept, they wouldn't need you.
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Well, they wouldn't. If everyone could do this stuff at the level that we do it, we wouldn't have jobs.
That's really good.
That's exactly right.
So anyway, that's...
Well, as we wrap up, I want one more question for you. What are you most proud of?
That's a great question. My family, I guess. But I think I know what you're alluding to.
No, that's a great answer.
I'm really proud of, from what I've done, the Gunnison stuff being one of the first people on it, and the amount of people that I've been able to show that place to and share it with over the years. I'm really proud of that. And I feel really lucky that I've maintained my health enough to keep doing these relatively hard things. On the ski front, I think that's a little bit easier because I think that, we all know how much Aspen has changed since you grew up here, and I moved here when I was 20 years old, and it's a different place, but it still has a lot of amazing things about it. But that World Cup race that we do, in my opinion, is the most unifying community thing that's left in Aspen, Colorado. And this year's race was maybe the greatest example of that we've ever had. There's been a lot of them, but we had 2 super successful days. The weather was good. The track was perfect. The events were exciting, blah, 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 all that. But going into the third day, which is a slalom, and which is generally the easiest race to pull off, I don't think it's the easiest race to race, and I think it might be the hardest in a lot of ways. But usually the weather's not as big a factor. The speeds are slower, the course is smaller, you have less area to control. It's not as dangerous. But we had an amazing storm that night, and everybody we could have laid down and said, hey, we got 2 out of 3, that'll get you in the Hall of Fame. And we're doing okay. But it just dumped and it dumped and it dumped. And I got to the mountain at about 2:15 that morning. And I was the first one there, and people started trickling in, and we're sitting there, and it is an absolute blizzard. And it's already probably snowed 6-7 inches, and it was just continuing to come down here. And I called up one of the patrollers that was up on the hill, and he goes, well, I don't even know if we should bring anybody up here because we're afraid it's going to slide, because we'd made all the ice for the GS, and he thought Spring Pitch, which is a groomed run, was going to slide. And then people just kept trickling in, and finally we're going, we got to at least try. We got to get some people on the hill. And we started taking them up in cats, and we started shoveling, and we started working, and the word was coming out. And this one kid showed up. We had a lot of ski club kids, and this young kid showed up from Steamboat, and he goes, I left my house at 11 o'clock. It was 3 a.m. You drove all night to get here and go up and work on the hill.
Wow.
And I just went, man, you're an all-star. And we never thought we were going to, like at about 3 a.m, I would have probably given our chances of about 2% of having that race. And in fact, one of the FIS officials, that's the International Ski Federation for anyone listening that doesn't know what it is, he was on the phone trying to change his tickets so he could get out. And he's a good guy, and he was helping us, but he was going, this is never going to happen. Anyway, people kept trickling in, and I was up there. It was still pitch dark, and people are just yelling and just getting into it. And it's miserable. And I look up a hill, and I see headlamps coming. I see like 20 more headlamps show up. And I'm like, man, this is unbelievable. And then I just put my head down and shoveled for another 20 minutes. And I ended up giving myself a hernia that night, which has been fixed. And I look up again, and I see another 20 headlights come over the ridge. And I'm like, Jesus, we actually have a chance. And somewhere around 5 a.m, we all started believing we had a chance. And we had over 100 people up there, including the CEO, the 2 highest ranking people in the ski company, standing side by side with a bunch of us dirtbags, just shoveling snow and throwing it around. And it was an amazing thing, and we pulled it off. And I don't know of anything else that we do that's so unifying here. And the fact that we did end up having the race, and it got good ratings, and everyone loved it, and it was successful, and in every possible way. But the thing that that sticks in my mind, and that I'm just most proud of, that I've been a part of developing that atmosphere up there that helps people want to just literally come up in a blizzard in the middle of the night. And I don't mean just getting out of bed at 2 a.m. I mean getting your ski boots on and working in the pitch dark. And
I think that's the testament to you, Jimmy.
Well, thank you, Andy. But it's a lot more than me. I mean, I think it's a small measure of it.
But you have to have a leader. You have to have a chief that people believe in, that people love. And as much as they do it for a World Cup slalom, they're doing it because of you. They believe in you. You had an amazing army for a long time, and you wore the Pope hat at the end of the season.
That's right.
And they celebrated you enormously. And kudos to you, buddy.
Well, thanks. And anyway, so I think that is the thing I'm singly the most proud of that I've managed to accomplish. But still got to get a bigger elk than you've gotten, though.
Very cool. So if anyone wants to book a trip with you in the Gunnison, who should they call? Where should they go?
The website is listed under both Gunnison River Rats and Elk Mountain Expeditions /River Rats.
Awesome.
Beautiful. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, you guys. It's
Thanks
great.
so much,
and,
Jimmy.
Let's kill a big one this year.
Yeah.
All right, bro.
That was fun, Jimmy. Thank you.
Well, I don't know if anyone will watch it, but we'll find out.
Yeah.
When I saw it's just that story. When I saw it's just a